This episode is brought to you by Crystal Lake Entertainment Ad Space. Advertise on the Coffee Fueled Stories podcast, the ideal platform for promoting your book release or sale. Your ad, 30 or 60 seconds long, will be featured at both the start and end of an episode, reaching a dedicated audience of horror and dark fiction readers. This is a perfect opportunity to increase visibility and connect with your target audience. See link in the show notes for details, or go to crystallakepub.com/shop. Crystal Lake Entertainment presents Coffee Fueled Stories. Hello. It's me, Michelle, your pocket DJ and host of Coffee Fueled Stories, a show where storytelling and coffee hang out. This week's special guest is a return superhero, Mr. Kalvin Ellis. Hello, welcome back.
Hello, thank you. It's great to be back.
This is so cool. So, the last time we talked, and what was really cool is you and I got caught up on the previous episode so that we would be able to remember what we talked about the first time.
Yes.
So we talked about your book, your first book, and at the time you weren't sure about when you were going to have book two. And so here we are, you have book two. So we're going to talk about book two, AuthorCon, and the horror community. So we've got lots of things to talk about. So thank you so much for coming back on the show and sharing your next adventures of Paisley Mott.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. It's been exciting watching you grow through all of this.
And you too, because like I said, the last time we talked, you had just released your first book, In the Hills Above the Grist Mill. And now you have In the Grave. Please, yeah.
In the grave where the bones are still wet is the sequel to In the Hills Above the Grist Mill.
And that title is like, it gives me creeps, but like in the best possible way.
That's what I was hoping for. I remember one time I heard somebody say, like, I think it might have been Hank Green, and he just said, "Here's a weird science fact: your bones are always wet." And so that really stuck with me and really creeped me out. And so I thought, well, this could play into a good title.
That was another thing that I remember when we were first talking. You gave some awesome scientific facts in the first book. And so it wasn't just like pop culture, and we talked a lot about pop culture because you threw in all kinds of stuff in there. And so now book two, why don't you take us into book two? And those who have not read book one, we're not going to give any spoilers, right? Like nothing.
Right.
Okay.
I won't ruin anything from book one talking about book two.
Perfect. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about book two, and then we'll deep dive and go into all of the goodness and the stuff that we love to nerd out on.
Sounds great. Well, in book one, Paisley Mott, our main character, she is a paranormal vlogger, and she gets called down to the Appalachian South, to a small mining town called Greywater Ridge, to investigate a series of murders that the local people believe were carried out by a Sasquatch sent by God. It's a weird premise, but it's important to know the premise of the first book to go into the second book. So after the events of Greywater Ridge, which is the first book, Paisley is left traumatized. There's a lot of really terrible things that happen in the first book. And so the second book is really based on, it's really trauma informed. So it's based on what people would do after a situation like that. There are some characters that carry over from the first book. I don't want to spoil who they are just because I don't want to spoil the first book. But they're also dealing with a lot of trauma. This whole event is traumatic for the town. And so we see a little bit of that in the beginning. And then Paisley decides she's going to go off on another adventure, and she's going to she goes to a little Rust Belt town called Howling Ivy, Indiana. And she goes there to help two teenage podcasters who think they have captured the voice of a a murdered girl on their podcast, and so she goes to help that with that. And of course, while she's there, she uncovers a whole lot of other mysteries directly linked to the murders, and some not so much.
Perfect for giving us the premise and no spoilers. One thing I remember was when we talked first, and you talked about the next book. You said it was going to be dark. You said it was going
Oh
to be
yes.
like you were going to take Paisley to like a whole different level. And I just
Yeah.
remember like getting goosebumps. I'm like, good Lord. I'm like, you've already like the poor like how much more is she going to take? Like,
Oh, it gets way, 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 way worse for Paisley.
oh
Um,
no.
a lot of people read the first book and they said, "Well, this is more mystery than horror," and absolutely, that was kind of the goal of the first book was to introduce people to the character, understand that the character was learning. And so I wanted her to grow as a character. And so I didn't want to throw her into the deep end right away. I wanted people to get to know her before we see her go through her changes, um, and growth as an investigator and as a person. And so in the second book, we turn that all the way up to 11. It's just some horrific things happen in the next book.
Okay, so without giving any spoilers, are you still going to continue with her arc in this intense direction? Or are you planning? How many? I know you don't know how many books you have for Paisley right
Yeah.
now, but can you see like several more Paisley stories?
Yeah, definitely. There's going to be at least 5 books and possibly 7. It just depends on what Paisley does. She is constantly surprising me with how resilient she is. So there could be 5 books, there could be 7. Just depends on how the story arc goes, um, and what happens with Paisley.
In the first book, you had some what we call Easter eggs, and we
Yes.
talked about those Easter eggs in the previous episode. Are you doing Easter eggs again with book two, or will you continue to do Easter eggs like throughout each book?
Oh, absolutely. Dropping in Easter eggs is one of my favorite things. And I drop them in for fans of pop culture. I drop them in for fans of horror. I drop them in for people that just know me personally. I'll drop some in that only my kids and my significant other will understand. So, yeah, there's just little bits hidden throughout. There's some on the cover, some deep in the story. So they're all hidden in there somewhere.
As a reader, like it's pretty cool because you're not just you're not just taking us into the story. You, like I said, having those little Easter eggs are kind of fun. I didn't realize you had Easter eggs, so now I know that if I have the opportunity to read more of your books, I'm going to be like, okay, there's going to be a significance to this name or this person's Instagram handle or something along those lines. So,
Hmm.
based off of what you just said, you're going to continue to give us these awesome little breadcrumbs of pop culture.
Yes. Absolutely. One, like I'll give you an example. One of the characters in the book, his name is Stilton Hawk, and I named him after Marcus Hawk, who you've had on the show.
I was
Um,
like, Marcus,
yeah, Marcus is
my Canadian brother from another mother.
yes, love Marcus, and so I asked him when I started writing the book. I said, "Hey, do you mind if I name a character after you?" And it's just the last name, but there is a moment where the character says, "Call me Hawk. It's way cooler," and it just, that was just a little nod to him. And nobody will really understand except for me and him, and well, now anybody that listens to this and knows Marcus. But yeah, there's lots of little things in there for my friends, and it's fun to put stuff in there so that when they find it, he already knew about it, but it's fun to put in there.
That's awesome. That's really cool. I see. You have to admit, like having those Easter eggs. You got to admit, as an author, like it takes it to another level, as opposed to like just having, like you said, just naming the character and not having any personal connection, right?
Hmm.
And so I'm going to ask you a silly question about names of characters because that's
Yeah.
kind of a big deal as an author coming up with names. Like,
Yeah.
Well, okay, what's the longest time you've spent naming a character?
Ooh, great question. So in this book, there's the two of the main characters, the boys that do the podcast. They host a podcast called the Simply Not Paranormal Podcast, and it's KNOT. And that's based off of the two main characters, and it took me forever to name them. And it's just rife with Stephen King references because the main character, the main person in the podcast, and kind of our second lead in the book, his name's Darius Knott. And Knott is after the true Knot in Doctor Sleep. And then Darius, he goes by Derry, which is famously the town from It. So that name took me a really long time to really settle on because it had to also work with the podcast name that they were going to use. And then his co-host, his name is Stephen Simply, but everybody just calls him Patch. For reasons you'll find out if you read the book. And so his name's Stephen Simply, and so they just call it the Simply Not Paranormal Podcast. And so those two names took me a really long time, but I could not be happier with how they turned out. And then the characters that wear them.
That is so cool. Like, okay, I I am not I'm not a novel writer, but I'm attempting a novella. And it's because, again, talking with you guys, so I've had this idea since 2016, 2017, and I never knew what the hell I was going to do with it. And so I finally decided, because again, talking with you awesome authors, I get inspired. I'm like, okay, I'm going to attempt it. I'm going to try it. I'm going to do something with this idea. And I created these two characters and I created their names. And should I tell you?
Yeah, oh God, yes, please.
Okay, I'm
The
not going to tell you
suspense
the
is killing
story.
me.
I'm not going to tell you the
Okay,
story,
okay.
but I'm going to tell you their names. So the two main characters are Leo and Ragnar.
Oh, perfect, perfect.
I don't know why, but I just had this idea of Ragnar. I was like, Ragnar sounds like a freaking badass, and I need to do
Yes,
something with him. I
I
don't
love it.
know. I don't know what I'm going to write about him, but so I had this name. That's why I asked you about it. I was like, I've got a name. I don't know what to do
It's
with it.
perfect. It's a famous Viking name.
Well, yeah,
So powerful.
yeah.
Love
So,
that. Love that. I cannot wait to find out what story these two are in.
thank you. Like I said, it was an idea, and I was like, crap. I have no idea what I'm going to do with these two guys, but they're buddies, they're best friends, and Leo, they couldn't be more opposite. So they're very yin yang, and but they would do it. They're brothers, like they would do it, not literally, but they would do anything for each other. And so that was this idea. I was like, I have these two guys. What adventures are they going to find? So thank you for letting me share it because I was really nervous to talk
Thank
about that.
you. Thanks for the sneak peek.
I have no idea what I'm going to do with those guys, but stand by because it could be another 6 years before I do something with them.
Sometimes the name comes first, you know?
And that was going to be my next question. Have you ever done that where you have the name of a character and you're like,
Yeah.
with me, I don't know what to do, but I want to tell you this story about this character.
Absolutely. So the character of Hollis Grimm from my first book, I had written, I think we talked about it a little bit on the first podcast, where I just had this idea and I wrote this scene. And the reason I wrote that scene was because I had this idea for a character, and his name was Hollis Grimm, and he was tall and dark preacher, you know, and I was just like, okay. And so then I had that name for a year or two, and then the scene came to mind. And so he existed well before the story ever did.
That is so cool. And like I said, we talked about him and I just had, as you were describing him and we spoke about Phantasm and the tall man and that was
Hmm.
how, I had him in the car that he drove.
Perfect. Yeah.
So that's really cool, especially because, tying into I mean, Phantasm, it doesn't get any more pop culture horror
Yeah.
classic than that.
Oh,
Like that's just
a real classic.
yes, yes. So that being said, why don't we dive into you went to AuthorCon
Yes. I went
and
to AuthorCon. Yeah.
you were with other authors and it's
So there's multiple AuthorCons, and that one that I went to in Virginia is Scares That Cares, and so
yes.
that's specifically horror. Hmm.
Because you were um Were you, I wasn't sure if you overheard or so kind of walk me through why we wanted to have this conversation. Like it was important to talk about your new book. It was
Yeah,
important to talk about, to reconnect because like I
sure.
said, I love talking with you. I had so much fun the first time,
So
so I was
great.
like, we have to do it again. Um,
Absolutely.
but we're gonna have a little bit of a message here. The first time it
Yeah.
was just all fun and games. This one we're gonna have a little bit of a purpose, so to speak. We wanted
Yeah.
to talk about how you said, I saw you did a story and it said something about as an author, horror author, you want to horrify, not glorify. And that
Yes.
like really caught my attention. And so I was like, okay, I don't know what's going on, but we need to talk about it. So would you please walk us through what you experienced so that we can have a deep discourse about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's just been some really negative things happening in the horror community lately, and AuthorCon comes up in that not because it's anything bad happened at AuthorCon, but quite the opposite. It Scares That Cares. I got to go down and meet just the kindest human beings, and I got to spend time with some friends in the horror community. Spencer Hamilton, like, is just one of the nicest people in the world, and he kind of showed me around. He'd been there before. Um, and just wonderful people. And Joe Ripple, who you
Yes.
know Joe,
Yes.
puts the whole thing on, and it was fantastic. And I got to see just the kindness that can come out of this community. And since then, there have been a couple of incidents online. I don't want to get into too much detail, but I'll be brief with some examples. There's been some examples of horror authors um, speaking very ill of reviewers, specifically female and trans reviewers. Um, then there was an incident where some horror authors shared intimate photos that had been sent to them with other authors, and then started a whole chat group where they were sharing these photos without consent. Um, and it really struck a chord in the horror community. And a lot of people were saying, well, this is why we don't read horror, because these things happen. But it's a shame that they see those things and not the good that comes out of, like, Scares That Cares, that raises a lot of money for a lot of really good causes. So it's just that last one just really got to me, because the people that were doing it had been people had complained about them before, because they felt like some of their work was glorifying sexual abuse rather than horrifying. And I think that there is a place for all horror in horror. I think that those stories need to be told. I just don't think we need to glorify them the way some people do. I always, if I see that in a story, and my book is no different, so I don't want to, come across as hypocritical. My new book has some incredibly difficult scenes, incredibly difficult. There is scenes of torture, um, child abuse, some very terrible things, but in no way is any of the act ever glorified. We're never in the POV of the killer, which it's okay to be in the head of the killer. We just need the story to wrap up to that we understand that we're not glorifying that behavior. We don't ever want to glorify sexual assault or sexual abuse of anybody. And it feels like sometimes that is happening. I won't name any names or anything like that, but it feels like that happens, and people are calling it out, and then they're just getting kind of shouted down sometimes. Sometimes people are saying, oh, if you don't like horror, don't read horror. Well, that person does like horror. I know quite a few people who love horror, extreme horror, splatterpunk, all of those things, and still feel like sometimes an author can take it too far by glorifying the act rather than just focusing on the horror of the act itself.
And thank you for that. Like, that was so well put. And we've talked about this, and in general, like the horror community, the reason that we like horror is, being scared, being exposed to monsters. Sometimes we relate with the monsters. Um, and that's okay because, we're human, we're fallible. And what you just said. There's I've read, splatterpunk, I've read extreme horror, and that's and I have been traumatized by various scenes that happened, but to your point, it wasn't about the act, and this is why I like reading horror, because it is cathartic. There is justice. It was funny, I was brushing my teeth and getting ready thinking about this conversation, and the one thing that just kept popping into my head, so I was like brushing my teeth and I was like, there's justice, like it's all about justice. And
Yes.
so I'm like brushing my teeth and
Yes.
I'm like, yes, it's justice. We want justice. We want
Yes.
that cathartic positive outcome. And so you could say it's very Disney in that way sometimes, because we do want our hero or
Hmm.
anti-hero to overcome this trauma. And like you said,
Yes.
sometimes you guys push your main character to that limit, and we just, we cringe. We're like, oh God,
Hmm.
please don't go to the dark side, like
Yes.
just
Exactly.
again with her justice, like just justice. Like all I kept thinking, like I said, as I was brushing my teeth, was just justice, damn it, justice.
Yes, and I feel like, and this might be getting a little deeper than we need to get, but I feel like a lot of people that like horror or write horror, like myself, have experienced a lot of trauma in our lives. A lot of, I've suffered a ton of trauma, neglect, and abuse in my childhood, and because of that, I found horror and I love horror, and I think that is the case with many, not all. I don't want to, say that every single person that likes horror has had a traumatic life, but I know that in my group of friends that is a common thread, and that is one of those things that is cathartic for us, is to watch horror movies, know that no matter how horrible it gets, there will be justice, like you said. Um, but one of the things that I have noticed with certain authors, and there's been a few reviewers I've noticed too, is that they know that a lot of our audience has experienced trauma and will use that as kind of a lever, and leverage that trauma to get something that they want, to manipulate the reader, and that is just so sad, because we should, again, we should not be using somebody's pain against them, and
Right.
and that just breaks my heart. And that is at the center of everything that has happened, I think, in the horror community, is people taking advantage of people that are just looking for connection.
Yes, and it's about lifting up. This is, you know, like I had no idea what type of superhero you were until we had spoken, the first time. And then and then we had that conversation, and it was just this wow, I was just like, oh my gosh, this guy's a superhero. I was like, he's not just some rando out there. There's a reason that he does what he does. And I'm trying not to get emotional right now, so I apologize.
Me too. Me
My
too.
face is getting a little bit pink. This is why, the importance of horror, and exactly what you said. It's all about being kind. Like you said, scares that cares. The horror community is a beautiful community because they are there to share in that collective pain that we've experienced, and to
Hmm.
have something positive come out of it. Like, never in a million years did I ever think that I would be talking with horror authors about how awesome their content is. Never. But here we are sharing uh mutual pain, if you will,
Hmm.
but in a positive way.
Yes.
Like,
Yes, exactly. Because we understand that trauma can build walls, but it also builds empathy. And horror writers and horror readers and horror reviewers are some of the most empathetic, caring, compassionate people I have ever met in my entire life. And
absolutely.
so when we get someone in our ranks that takes advantage of those things, it really really upsets us.
Yes, it's that's the instant, it's all the things that you don't want, right? Like, there's,
Yes.
when you sit down with a book, and you think about all of the things that you expect or that you want from that book, and it's to take you to this happy place, even if
Hmm.
it's going to be a very dark place, it
Very
will be a
dark
happy
place. Yes.
place.
Yes,
But the last thing you expect or want is to be taken to the place that you've worked so hard your whole life to get out of. And,
exactly.
that being said, what I loved about book one is you had a balance. And by balance, I mean there was a darkness, but there was also a silliness.
Yeah.
And you don't always get that in horror. But sometimes you do, like Stephen King, he'll toss in some silliness in there. And that's I wanted to ask you, did you toss in when you toss in silliness, like is it you feel like it's getting too dark or it's getting too heavy and you need to give some levity? Like why walk us through your levity in books one
Sure.
and two, if you will.
Yeah. So, all of horror comes from horror and comedy come from the same place. They come from tension. If you want a really good, something really, really good in the horror genre, you add some tension and things are scarier. You want a good joke? It's the tension that comes from that joke that makes that joke good. And so if you can balance the two, you can ping pong between the two and add tension. So a well placed joke will add tension to the horror as well. I'm not saying that have mastered that yet. I just understand it a little bit. But I also understand that it can also break a scene. And so if there is a funny action that comes in the tension, it will break the horror. And so when I insert comedy and humor into my horror, I do it through the character. And so Paisley Mott, being my main character, uses humor to defuse her sense of danger. So anytime she is either anxious or afraid, she will make an inappropriate joke that she finds hilarious. And there are certain characters who don't appreciate it in the stories, and then there are characters that do appreciate it, and that actually makes them feel more comfortable as well. Because if Paisley's okay enough to joke, then we're probably going to be okay. And so there are characters that will start to do the same thing because they feel comfortable enough around Paisley. And that definitely happens a lot in the second book as well. I'll probably even more so because she's in more danger and everything's even a little more terrifying. So, yeah, I try to balance it by allowing the characters to bring the humor and not the story.
I love that. And now one of the things I don't know if other people will think this is horrifying or horrific, but you had the spit scene in there
Yes,
in book one,
yes, I did.
and that one messed me up, man. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
That was
yeah,
horrific. Uh,
it's pretty gross.
like so I unfortunately did not read book two. So did you do any other spit scenes? Did you do
I
anything
mean,
nasty and
nobody
gross in
nobody's
book two?
nobody's nobody spits in anybody's food, but there are some nasty, like there's horrific nasty stuff, and then there's just unfortunate nasty stuff. There's a little bit of gross out, but just a little bit. um maybe a little more than the first book, by volume, but not a lot. The gross out stuff, Stephen King says, gross out. If you can't scare them, gross them out. And there is one part where I try to scare, and then it's just really gross.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And then I love that you had the Blazing Saddles references in
Yes.
book one.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if you can give away anything without giving away anything, but did you?
Um, you know,
Yes, yeah.
there are very similar. Um, Paisley, is in her early 20s. And so, but the references she make are so much older, and it's not specifically called out. She mentions it a few times that she watches wrestling and movies with her dad. That was her favorite thing to do growing up, spending time with him watching movies. And so she references all the movies he watched because that's
Very.
what makes him happy. So that was kind of her safe space, as being in those things and having that connection with her dad. And so she references a lot of movies that are a lot older than you would think that she would be referencing. But there are quite a few in the new book.
Nice, nice. I'm really hoping I do get a chance to read it. I really, because like I said, I remember you saying you were gonna take her to a dark place, and I was like, I don't know if
Very dark.
I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I want that. I don't know if I'm ready for that.
She's not ready either, which is the whole idea is that, she thought she'd seen the worst of it. She tries to take a case that seems simple enough, but then another character calls her out at one point and says, you say you took this because it's easy, but you knew it wouldn't be. Paraphrasing because I don't want to give away who the character is and what they're saying, but that's kind of, I feel like that's what trauma does to us is we get through it and then we try to push a little bit farther the next time and a little bit farther the next time and see just how strong we are, not because of the trauma, but in spite of it.
I love that. And based off of what you were saying, I don't know if you recall the comic, the cartoon Super Chicken. Do you remember the Super Chicken?
Yeah,
And
super chicken.
remember,
Yeah,
you knew the job was dangerous when you took it. Buck, 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 buck.
exactly. Now I kind of wish I'd have referenced super chicken in this thing, but only you and I would have got it.
I love like Snagglepuss
Yes.
and Exit Stage Left even. Like there's something about like 70s
Hmm.
cartoons and
Yes.
the characters of these characters that Hanna-Barbera and
Hanna-Barbera era. Yes.
Warner Brothers.
Warner Brothers,
Uh,
Looney Tunes.
yeah, oh my God, Bugs
Mhm.
Bunny.
Yeah.
I'm surprised I don't have a tattoo of Bugs Bunny.
A little known fact is that Bugs Bunny is a little bit of the inspiration for Paisley Mott as well. Of that, just like always with the wisecracks, but always to diffuse a situation, never to just like poke fun at somebody, but to poke fun because that person's punching down and they're trying to punch up.
That's and what was interesting was I loved that they had Bugs Bunny. He would wear, I mean, I guess you could call it wearing, he was dressed in drag, but one of my
Yeah.
favorite scenes was when he's wearing the big summer hat and he's picking carrots and he's got a basket and he's singing when the swallows come back to Capistrano and that
Hmm.
god awful like singing song that he's doing
Yes.
and there's never anything off or weird about the fact that he's wearing this
Right.
big summer hat and his ears are sticking out of it.
Yes.
Like, I just loved that. As a kid, I didn't
Yeah.
know any. I was 7 watching
No.
it, for Christ's sake. I'm
Right.
like,
We just accepted that Bugs was cool enough that he could do whatever he wanted, and he could be whoever he wanted. He could be a
yes,
superhero. He could be an opera singer. He could do anything he wanted because he just had self confidence, and there were people that were giving him a hard time, but he always had a sense of humor about it.
yes. Okay, do you remember the big hairy red monster?
Yes,
And
it
he's
looked
doing
like a hairy tooth. Yes.
Yeah, and he's doing the nails and he's talking and he's
Hmm.
asking the question. Like, I thought that was hysterical. I was,
Yeah.
again, 7. I was a child, and I just thought it was the most hilarious thing. Bugs Bunny, so confident, just sitting there doing the nails of this
Hmm.
monster. Like,
Yeah.
just blew my mind.
Yeah.
Anyway, we could probably talk about Bugs Bunny and how awesome he was for like an hour
Probably. Yes.
because
Guaranteed.
I freaking love Bugs. I love
Oh,
Bugs.
me too.
We've talked about Paisley. We've talked about trauma. We've talked about the horror community. We did our
Hmm.
little PSA. So thank you for
Yeah.
the PSA. It was very important that we had that PSA. What else besides Paisley and her adventures, if there aren't any, are you working on anything else besides Paisley and her
I
adventures?
am. I've
What you
already got
got?
part 3 of Paisley planned, but before I get to her next book, I'm really focusing right now on a horror slasher book. It's like a novella. Maybe it'll be a novel. I'm trying to keep it in novella length just because it's not something I've ever done. I can do short stories. I got the pacing for that down. I can do novels. I got the pacing for that down. But I really wanted to try a novella, and so I'm writing a '90s camp slasher. Uh, that's part Friday the 13th, part Home Alone, and our main character it's very funny. It's more comedic beats per page than Paisley for sure, um, because it's a 13-year-old girl, and she goes to this camp, and I don't want to spoil why she's doing it, but she takes it upon herself to wipe out a group of cultists who have taken over this camp. And so she does it in like a Home Alone style. She's a 13-year-old girl, so she's got to, use the things that she has at the ready, and that's her brains and her cunning. And so there's a little bit of like slasher-esque stuff going on as well. But the story is told from the 13-year-old girl's point of view when she's an adult. So she's talking about, this is a thing that happened to me. So it gives me, because I kept trying to write it from her point of view, and I just couldn't. The things that the narrator was saying just didn't make sense for a 13-year-old girl to say. Yes, she might have been in that thing, but then the comedy wasn't coming through. It didn't feel natural. But then with her narrating it and telling us the story, she can say really inappropriate things and point out things that her 13-year-old self wouldn't have noticed in the moment, but her as a 43-year-old can. So it has been a really, really funny story to write. So that's the thing I'm most focused on right now. I'm hoping to release that Friday the 13th in September. September 13th is the goal for that one. I have not told anyone else that. That's not true. I think I dropped a story of it, but I wasn't specific about what book it was. But that's the story that I'm hoping for that. And then I'm working on a book of short stories as well, and that's about 60% complete. So we got a couple other ones to finish up and then put them in. So I've got some things to work on, and then once that's done, I have to decide whether I want to finish another story that exists in the Paisley universe but is not a Paisley story, or do I want to just jump right into book 3. And I think that will depend on the reception of the second Paisley Mott book, and it's getting really good reception so far, but only the people that really love Paisley only a couple people that really love Paisley have finished it. So of course they're gonna have a better reception from those folks. So
that makes sense. And you were doing, you did some films before. So are there any scripts that you're working on, any films that you're working on, or are you just focusing on the written word at this moment?
Just focused on the written word right now, though. I would really love to see Paisley come to the small screen. I think each book would make a perfect series, season. So I would love to do that, and I think I'm hoping I'm in beginning talks to go out, possibly go out to LA in August to talk to a producer about that, but we'll have to see. I can't make any promises or spoil anything there, but the interest is there a little bit. So
Very cool. I think we talked about like a Paisley Mott T-shirt or something like that the first time, and we were, because I'm definitely a fan of Paisley. Like she's a great character, and
thank you.
so I'm definitely Team Paisley all the way. And we talked about King Court and
Mm-hmm.
his awfulness, but
Terrible.
but you I love how you gave the backstory when we spoke, but you didn't give the backstory in the book because, as
Yeah.
you said, you didn't want to give him you didn't want us to feel sympathetic towards him. And I
Yes.
really appreciate that as a reader. So I love that I learned that from you, but I'm
Yeah.
so glad that I didn't learn that in the book.
Yes. I have thought about like putting it out on my newsletter, and just adding that little chapter for anybody that wants a little bit of Courtney Tear's backstory. But, I couldn't put it in the book for that reason, because I didn't want him to be sympathetic. And the people in the story didn't know his backstory, and it doesn't justify his actions. So I just didn't feel like it fit in the story well enough.
And like I said, I learned so much from you. I love having you on the show because I feel not only do we get to talk about like Bugs Bunny and Superman, but you're
Yes.
also very versed as a writer, and I learned so much from you. So
Thank you.
thank you for being here talking about
That's
your
so kind. I love it.
awesome
I
character.
just love talking about writing and the ideas behind writing, and it's just so much fun.
Well, you know what? Anytime you want to talk about writing and what you do, I'm here for it. So like
Thank
I said,
you.
you got a fan.
Oh,
I've been hooked
I
from the
appreciate
start.
that.
So,
Thank you.
if you need an arc reader for whatever you got going, I'm out
Always.
here. I'm out here if you need me.
Thank you. It's very kind. I will take you up on that on this next one.
I'm in. I'm in. Like I said, I love because I know you as we've spoken. It gives me a little bit more depth into your books. I know why you write the characters that you do because you're not
Yeah.
just taking, and I say that I know you even though I don't really know you. What I'm getting at is because of the conversations that we've had, I feel that you're not just taking like King Court.
Mhm.
There's a reason you created him. And we
Yes.
talked about that. And then I learned about his character. And like you said, you did not want to give us that sympathy. But
Right.
like you said, if you put it out there on your website, however you want to share it, it will let us know. Again, that's another way that we can connect with you. You didn't
Right.
just create this guy out of freaking thin air. There's a
Hmm.
reason you created this guy.
Yes. Yeah, he is sadly a part of me, just like they all are. And I really like, when people that know me personally read the books because it's like, they've seen the picture that the puzzle creates. The rest of the world just gets to see the pieces, so they'll see each character and see a puzzle piece, but not know the picture that creates of me as a writer and me as a person. And then the people that do, they'll message me and say, I was reading this and this character is you. The character of Derry in the next book is me when I was 16 years old. Like the way he behaves, his anxiety, his nervousness, everything he does, even down to the look. I wanted to put that on there because he in the book is dealing with a loss that I know all too well. The book is dedicated to the three younger siblings that I had who passed away, because in the book Derry is dealing with that same thing,
Mm.
and so I wanted to put that in there so that I really felt like I could write the character well enough and talk about that loss and how to respond to that loss. And so the people that read Derry just know that it's me right away, and it makes it interesting too because then nobody is free from suspicion in these books, and so people are reading it like, did you make yourself a bad guy? Well, we don't know yet. I'm not gonna can't spoil that, so you'll just have to read it and find out. But that's what it keeps them on the edge of their seats a little bit.
And I appreciate that. And that's one of the things that's why I love having you on the show. So like let's take this hypothetical where I'm literally in a bookstore and I grab your book off the shelf and I have no idea who you are. I don't know anything about you. I read your book and I just go, "Oh, that was a good book. I thoroughly enjoyed it." But because we've talked about your characters, because I have that connection, you've told us about your background, you've shared your trauma, it adds so much. So even though it is heavy in the sense of being human, right? Like you have
Mhm.
there's this human element to it that just takes it to a whole new level. And being able to talk with you about it and to learn about it and to understand that you have taken your pain and that you've done something positive with that. Like that, like I said, that's why I call you a superhero. That's why you're Superman. Like I just love, you're not just some POS out there just, being awful. You're doing something good with this pain, as terrible as it is, as it was. And you're putting it out there for us and you're sharing it. And we're connecting with you. Like,
Well, thank you.
ah,
That's incredibly kind. That's that's because we're talking about it, and we're talking. I mentioned my siblings. Is a lot of it is they weren't given the opportunity to have the life that I have. One of them died when he was 4. The others were sick their entire life and died when they were teens, and they never got the opportunity to live their dreams and to do good things. I mean, they were great human beings, and so I want to live my life in a way that honors them. To say, that if there is an afterlife and I end up there and they're there, I want them to look at me and be like, be proud of what I've done. And so, no matter what I do, I want to make sure that I'm living a life that they would they would be proud to live themselves. So because that's what I would have wanted if it was me instead, I would have wanted them to go forth and be magical, and to do things that just make people happy and make people's lives easier and make them feel connected, because I think that's one of the most important things we could ever possibly do.
And on that note, you made me cry and you said my
I'm sorry.
tagline, so but in the
I think
best
about it a
possible way.
lot. I think about it a lot.
Like I don't I we can probably just stop right there. We can just that's like it. That's it. And that's exactly what you just said. Like everything that I went through, all of the shit that I went through, everything that I've dealt with, there are things that I don't like. I I couldn't even watch hospital scenes in TV shows
Yeah.
for like at least a year. And I knew why they were doing it. Like my brain was saying, they're just adding drama. They're trying to amp up the drama. But my
Yes.
brain was also saying, you know what? You just spent a year and a half in a hospital room, 16 hours a day.
Hmm.
Like, so my brain
Yeah.
was like so confused. And so now that's why I'm like, okay, I want to do good things. I want to help people. The sadness and the pain and the struggles that I've gone through, I want other
Hmm.
people to know they're not alone.
Exactly.
I can help
Yeah.
them, as silly as that sounds. And
It doesn't sound silly at all.
that's why go forth and be magical is just this, I don't know, it's fucking powerful. Like
It's beautiful. Yeah.
I'm just gonna thank you. Like
Yeah.
that's all we want to do. That's it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's like, just talking, you mentioned being spending all this time in a hospital room. My youngest daughter, Maddie, she's 18, and she hadn't read my first book yet. She started it and then stopped because she's not a big reader. And when she just recently had open heart surgery, and she told me that she wanted to read my book while she was in the hospital. And so I put it on my Kindle for her. And then I spent the entire time in the hospital with her. I checked in with her and I checked out with her, and I didn't leave her side the entire time except for while she was in surgery. And she was just too tired to even hold the Kindle and read. So she asked me to read it to her. And so I got to read this book to her, and it was just something so special about that. And then without knowing what Maddie was going to go through, there is a scene with a dad and a kid in the hospital in the second book that just hit so close to home for her. And so after she got back and she was in recovery at home, she read the second book, and just, she was like, how this makes so much sense. And I was like, I wrote that a year and a half ago before we even knew you needed surgery. And it connected us on such a deep level, because that's what writing can do. That's what horror can do. That's what all writing can do. Is Stephen King and On Writing talks about how it's like this telepathic thing that he says, I'm writing something here in 2001, and you're going to read it somewhere down the stream of time, and you're going to see exactly what I see. And that is magic. And we can do good with that, or we can do bad with that. And I choose to do good. And yes, some of the things are horrific and scary, but life is horrific and scary. And so if Paisley Mott can get through it, then maybe we can too.
And that's the perfect tagline right there. Like, that's it. So
Right.
why don't we go ahead and just we'll like wrap it up.
Sounds good.
Or if you have a saying that you would like to share with the readers and listeners.
I do, and I'll go forth and be magical. I'll do that one. But I want to. We kept touching on Superman.
Yes.
And my favorite saying is, "You are who you choose to be," from the Iron Giant, because I know I can't be Superman, but I can want to be like Superman, which is what the Iron Giant is about. And so, "You are who you choose to be" is my favorite saying, because that's my whole life has been choosing to be the person I am. So, now with that being said, go forth and be magical.